Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and now that the summer is in full swing, the pest pressure is on. Certainly in my garden, there are so many Japanese beetles that they're taking out a lot of plants, and it's getting kind of hard to keep up with them. And really, as fast as I can weed feed and mulch my garden, the pests are moving in just as fast. So now I'm trying to weed, mulch, and I'm checking for those bigger, slower moving pests. Things like tomato hornworm, caterpillars, and maybe some squash bugs or Colorado beetles on the potatoes. I'm desperately trying to grab them and kill them off before they can eat any more of my plants. This is kind of what today's discussion is going to be. This chat is all about pest control strategies to try in your garden, because it really might seem like a futile battle picking off bugs by hand. I mean, there is that kind of gross ick factor. I mean, it's bugs that you're handling, right? I've never been into bugs, and I don't have little kids either. But if you do have kids that are into bugs, pest control in the garden can actually be quite fun for them, so I'm told. I was reading a blogger fairly recently who sent her kids off into the garden with mason jars and lids and asked her kids to pick off as many of the pests that they could find. And the kid who picked the most got a prize, although I think both of them ended up getting prizes, really. But her kids were truly fascinated by bugs. So if you have kids or kids that like bugs, maybe have them help you in the garden in fighting the pests, right? I really hate picking bugs off by hand, and it's one of the reasons why things are going very slow in the garden. I never used to be kind of freaked out by picking things off by hand, and I think it's because in the back of my mind there's that nagging worry, is this poisonous? Is it going to cause problems? As you get older, right, you start to be more aware of these things. If it's a spider, forget it. I'm toast. I'm out. No, not doing it. I got stuck in the raspberry patch for a good 20-30 minutes until my adult stepson had to come and rescue me from the large white spider that looked like the creepy exploding spiders in Solstheim in the Skyrim game, if you've ever played that. I swear that thing was huge. But I digress. Other bugs, in the UK, I used to pick off caterpillars off plants and stuff all the time, no problem. But I think, over here, there's just so many weird and wonderful critters and insects. I'm still kind of learning, what's okay and what's not. And, I've been here for, a long time in the US, and I'm still figuring those things out. But Maine's a new state, right? I don't necessarily know what some things are, and there's a lot of bugs that I recognize. There's various butterflies that we have in the UK that we also have here in Maine, so that was kind of nice seeing some of those. But when it comes to a lot of the bugs that I'm seeing, I have no idea what it is, and whether it's going to be something that's going to sting or bite, whether it's going to hurt. I don't know. There's caterpillars here that cause some pretty bad allergic reactions for some people, and some of the beetles and bugs really don't know what they are. So unless I've got my trusty leather gloves on, I'm really not going to be picking things up. Meanwhile, my husband is running around the garden trying to catch a toad and chase me with it in his bare hands. So he's fine with those things. I'm a lot more squeamish. So if you are squeamish, get yourself some gloves that you feel pretty comfortable in, having your PPE, right, your personal protective gear, I think goes a long way in helping your mindset and being able to get in and tackle some of these things. I've made the mistake of picking or ripping out and weeding poison ivy with my bare hands because I didn't know what it was. I learned from that mistake, and so did my husband when he was weed whacking through various things. So now I know going into the garden, long sleeves, long pants, and a good pair of gloves. And I can handle most things now, just not the spiders. And I will say hand picking bugs is going to take a long time, but it does mean that your beneficial bugs are not harmed in the process. You're, very specifically targeting those bugs, and even small hand pickings of pests from your garden are going to add up and help reduce that pest population for your garden in this season and in the following season, depending on the pest, right? There's going to be fewer of them that are going to be available to mate and reproduce, and that's going to help your pest populations drop down. I will say that it is helpful to have something in easy reach for you to put your hand picked bugs into. I can't tell you the number of times when I've been out in the garden and I'm doing whatever, weeding and stuff, and, then I pick up this bug and I don't really want to squish it in my hands. Like, I don't really want to be doing that. But I'm like, oh, I don't have anything to put this in. Like, what am I going to do with it? So having like a bucket or an old coffee can or something, like a plastic coffee can that you can take with you to the garden, like something that you can put like water in to, help stop the bugs from going anywhere. Actually, a bucket of water is ideal, to drown the pests in, especially if you're going to feed them to chickens or ducks later. You don't want anything like soapy that's going to hurt them. Other people will use soapy water to drown their pests into, and dish soap or castile soap are the most popular choices, and both seem to work fine. If I find like ticks on the dogs or on us, on clothes, I'll pull them off and put them into castile soap and water to kill them off, and it works really great. Castile soap is used a lot on our homestead, from dishes to laundry and so much more. But it's one of those neat things to have around, and soapy water in a spray bottle or in a pump garden sprayer is one of those easy pest control methods that beginner gardeners can really use. And soapy water in a spray bottle has been really good at saving our broccoli from aphids, black fly, and those kind of scale white fly bugs. They're kind of all a member of the aphid family, and we've had quite a lot of success using that when we lived in Utah. So we would go out early morning before the bees were up and about, or out late at night or in the late evening if the sprinklers were not coming on, and we basically sprayed the aphids with the soapy water, and we sprayed them very liberally, and it knocks them off the plant and it kills them. Like, the soapy water like suffocates them because they breathe through their bodies, and the soap prevents that airflow from happening, so it kind of suffocates them. So using soapy water has been a method that we've used to deal with like wasps' nests and stuff like that, and it works really good for if you've got hand-picked bugs and you don't happen to have chickens or ducks that are going to be fed them later. So that works pretty well. But the problem, of course, is that they don't, soapy water and stuff doesn't discern between good bugs and the bad bugs. So even though it was really good at taking out the aphids and things, if I knew or I saw that there was ladybugs, whether it was larvae or adults or even lacewings that were feeding in the area where the aphids were, that wasn't somewhere that I would then treat with the soapy water spray, because I didn't want to hurt those ladybird or ladybug larvae or even the adults with the soapy water. I wanted to keep those good beneficial insects doing what they're doing, and I want those to be able to reproduce so they will help with tackling the pests later or in another season. So and that's a really good, important point to make, that many of these pest treatments, like the methods, like some of these home remedy kind of things, things like the soapy water spray or using diatomaceous earth. Oh my gosh, trying to say that without coffee this morning's rough. Neem oil spray, garlic and pepper spray, like these things, they can hurt your beneficial bugs, like the ladybug, the bees, the assassin bugs, and the pirate bugs. Those bugs that are going to help pollinate or take care of the pests in your garden, they can be hurt and killed off by some of these, natural or easy pest treatment methods that many home gardeners use. So I always like to throw out that sort of line of caution to you, that if you want to, or if you're looking at these kind of holistic gardening methods, then it's really about finding the balance between these things. And certainly you can use some of these methods of treating your plants, but knowing the right time to apply them in your garden is where it's going to help, because you don't want to hurt those other bugs. And, you know, if you remember the training series about integrated pest management, it's going to take at least 3 years for your garden's ecosystem to begin to balance. But most success with this natural integrated pest management is after 5 years or even 7. So it's a long game to play, but the benefits are worth it because you're letting your garden, you know, tackle things naturally. So back to the pest control, I mentioned that there's other spray treatments a little earlier, right? Again, these are a broad attack approach with the bugs. They can hurt both the good bugs and the bad bugs in the garden. So find the best time to apply to reduce that likelihood that the good bugs are going to be exposed to these treatments. So the first up is neem oil, and you know, this has a bunch of uses in the garden, from helping with certain fungal problems to deterring pests. I'm always looking for a neem oil that is OMRI or OMRI certified to use in the garden, and always read the usage rates on the label. The rates can vary depending on the brand and the type of neem oil, so definitely read the label. And lots of people have had success with neem oil, others can't get over the smell, so if you're unsure, get a small container first before getting a bigger one. For some people, you're mixing up the neem oil with water, and it's kind of like a shake and spray kind of deal, or you shake it up, put it in a pump sprayer and then spray. People often use this for fruit trees and controlling some of the pests associated with those. And like I said, it's often used for certain fungal problems as well. So it's a good option to have available in your gardening toolkit. And it's one that you may not use every year, you may not use every other year, you may only use it occasionally, but it's a good one to have handy. Garlic and pepper spray is another one. This is a kind of home remedy kind of pest control, and there's a few different ways people make it. There's lots of stuff available online that you can look at. For some people, they steep the garlic and hot peppers in oil or in water for a few days. Other people whiz it all up in a blender and then let it sit for a few days. Either way, you let things kind of stew together for a little bit, then you strain out the bits and then you mix it with water and then spray your plants with it. It's said to help with various bugs that bite your plants. I've not really had much success with this method, but other gardeners have, so I thought I would mention it for you. Another spray that you can do if you happen to have rhubarb handy on the property. I've randomly found some rhubarb whilst I was stuck in the raspberry patch, so that was somewhat successful, even though I was stuck by a spider. But if you can take some of the bigger leaves of rhubarb and steep those in water for a couple of days, or actually even quicker is if you pour boiled water over the leaves, like break up some leaves and pour boiled water over it, and then let that steep for a little while whilst it cools down, and then pour that into a sprayer and then spray your plants. It's pretty good at deterring flea beetles, but again, this is one that you would want to do relatively early in the morning, so you're away from, you know, your beneficial insects from getting hurt by the spray. I guess the oxalic acid that is in the leaves of the rhubarb, it helps to deter the flea beetles and some other biting insects from your plants. One of the things that I was reading though was it is much better if you do like multiple sprayings of that. So you spray it, you let things dry, and then you spray it again, let it dry, and then spray it again, let it dry, and that works a lot better. So that's an option for you if you have a bunch of rhubarb and you don't really know what to do with it. Like rhubarb leaves, I would always put in the compost bin, but now there's potentially another option for you there. Another kind of home remedy type of pest control, and this one I'm actually quite interested in, is cedar oil that's mixed with water, and it can help deter biting insects from your plants. I did read that it might help deter deer too, but the garlic and pepper spray as well can help deter mammals. So I've been told by other people that I've been sort of talking to who have various deer problems, not necessarily here in Maine, but across other parts of the US. So maybe I'll give the garlic and pepper spray another go, but more for controlling the deer and deterring them. But the deer are eating my sweet peppers and various other things now, and they've got quite a lovely buffet of, you know, organically raised produce coming out of my garden. So I'm starting to get a little concerned that I'm not going to get a harvest, but we've got some very well fed deer around us. But one of the interesting things about this cedar oil that intrigued me is, number one, it's relatively easy to make. You mix cedar essential oil and water together, shake and spray your plants, but you can also soak chunks of cedar in water for a few days and then spray the plants. And given that when my husband isn't chasing me with a toad in his hands around the homestead, he's a woodworker, so he often has like little bits or cut-offs of wood or wood shavings that are cedar, so this might be an easy one to try in the garden. There are different types of cedar, so I'm not sure if it's going to work better with a certain type of cedar. So like eastern cedar is obviously native to the East Coast, and then the western cedar is native to the West Coast. I don't know if that makes a difference depending on where you are and the type of cedar that you use, but that might be something to try. That might be one that's relatively straightforward for me to do, and I'm using up something that is a waste product from my husband's wood shop, so that's going to be something that I'm going to give a go, I think, in the upcoming weeks, if I can find the cedar wood shavings, because right now he is working on a trestle table for the house that is made from beams that have come from the barn. So he found some 150-year-old, 200-year-old wood beams that were just kind of stacked somewhere, or I think he may have taken it off the floor or one of the walls or something. Anyway, he found some really old barn planks, and he's turning it into this gorgeous trestle table for the house that he's built by hand. So I'm really excited for that project as it's coming through. So right now he's not necessarily working with cedar, but the minute that he does, I will be nabbing some of those wood shavings to steep in water. So you basically steep in water for a few days and then drain it off and put it in a sprayer and use that to spray your plants. Next up is diatomaceous earth, or DE. It is a white powder that can be dusted around your plants and over plants to stop bugs crawling on them. I'm going with DE because it's a lot easier to say than diatomaceous earth. It is like cut glass and razor blades basically for bugs, and it actually specifically has instructions on the bag to avoid application near bees and other beneficial insects, because it doesn't, it hurts everything that is a crawly kind of bug or a flying bug. If it's a bug, it's going to hurt it basically. DE is really good if it's dry. It works very well protecting your plants. If it's wet, it doesn't work. So once it gets wet, it loses its effectiveness. But many organic gardeners and farmers use this for protecting leafy greens. I used it when we lived in Utah in the garden a couple of times, and I had mixed success, given that I had like a lot of bees in my garden, and here too I have a lot of like bumblebees and things in my garden. I'm less inclined to use this method just because of the larger bee population that we have. I mostly use DE in the chicken's dust bath and the coop to help deter mites. That's really where I used a lot of that, but a lot of gardeners have good success with it. So I would love to hear from you if you had good success with DE or diatomaceous earth and how you use it in your garden. So please let me know. Laws are an interesting pest control method. On one hand, you can hopefully convince enough of the bugs that there's something totally awesome that they need to go check out, and hopefully they end up in your trap rather than in your garden. But on the other hand, are you then attracting more of the pests into your garden that may have otherwise overlooked your veg patch? So those are a really interesting pest control method. Some people use them and love them. Other people feel that it brings a lot more pests into the area. And people, sometimes find that they have more of an issue, later on or in another season than what they did before they started using the law. I've got a big enough property that I could put the law somewhere else, where it's going to attract things away from the garden. And also with some of the other strategies that I'm using for the integrated pest management, the interplanting of different plants, companion planting, using flowers as well as vegetables, not growing kind of big blocks of the same thing, so it's a nice beacon for the various pests, like, hey, this is our favorite food right here, let's go. So I think when used in conjunction with some of these other methods, you're going to have better success anyway. But certainly for other types of pests, laws are very, very common. So like in the UK, laws for codling moths and apples and pears are pretty common. I've actually been looking at laws for Japanese beetles for next year, and I've seen some really incredible ones that farmers have come up with. Like there was one Japanese beetle law where it was like a trash can that this farmer had converted, and all of these Japanese beetles were just going into this trash can, and when they opened it up, it was just full of them. It's crazy the amount that was in there, but it kept them away from the crops, so that was pretty good. And one of the nice things about laws is they use pheromones usually that are very specific to that pest, so they're targeted. They're not going to attract and hurt your beneficial insects. So that's one thing that I'm very sold on as using laws, is it's not going to hurt the bees and the other pollinators and the other beneficial insects that are out in my garden. I had an accidental law trap happen when I left a 5-gallon bucket outside in the tomato patch. I'd been using the bucket to move wood chips and mulch, so haul down a wheelbarrow full of mulch. Well, because my garden beds are already planted, it's kind of, takes a lot longer to grab handfuls of wood mulch and then put them down. It's much easier for me to kind of fill up a 5-gallon bucket and then, start sprinkling that around, the tomato plants or whatever plants that I'm dealing with. So that was a lot easier. So I'd left the bucket out into the tomato patch, and we've had a few storms over the last week. And I was super busy with some really long work days, so I hadn't gotten to the garden for a few days. And then when I went over, there was a good few inches of water that had gathered in the bucket, but to my surprise there was 50 dead Japanese beetles in there too. So I'm not sure if they were attracted to the light color of the bucket, whether they were thinking it's flowers or whatever, or whether it was the water in the bucket. But either way, it definitely helped the garden a little bit by taking out some of those Japanese beetles, because once you kind of get a bunch of them together, they have this whole feeding frenzy thing going on, and it's really difficult to sort of get back into a state of control when that kind of thing happens with them. So for some areas of my garden, it's already been and gone, but hopefully they can start making progress with some of the other methods of control of these bugs in the garden, and hopefully you can look to doing something similar too. Laws are very common for things like wasps, like the paper wasps, and stuff in people's gardens. We used those before in Utah to help pull the wasps away from our beehives, and it worked quite well actually, and there was various things that you could use as a law for wasps. I mean, obviously, like the sugary water worked well, the pheromone piece worked really well, random bit of salami worked well, like because wasps were attracted to like protein at one point, which was really interesting to watch. Like, I never thought that would work, but it did. And some of the law traps that you can get, that, I mean, they don't look great, right? It's very obvious that that is a law trap. So if you're looking for things from an aesthetic point of view, like a law trap may not be quite what you're looking for, but they do work very well. So definitely something to look into for your garden as well. And then finally, there's organic targeted solutions for various pests, like releasing parasitic nematodes that go for a specific host, or introducing parasitic wasps, ladybugs, and other various control methods. BT is one that is pretty popular for organic farmers, and it stands for Bacillus something beginning with T. I'll have to look that up. I'm not entirely sure, but it is a very, very common one. It's like a big B and a little T. That's how like it's listed usually in some of the gardening magazines or catalogs and stuff. A lot of people use it to protect against leafy greens, but various other crops too, and it's very popular and has quite good success rates. So if you're kind of starting into these nematodes and parasitic wasps and stuff to control your pests, do a bit of reading before diving in, because you want to make sure that you're not wasting your money by getting the wrong thing, but also for them to be successful, you have to apply them at the right time in the garden, when the pest is in that right stage of their growth cycle, for that control method to be successful. So pest control is definitely a worthwhile activity to spend some time in gaining some knowledge and doing some research. It's certainly one of the things I'm really interested in learning about at some of these ecologically managed farms and the organic certified farms that are around me. Like, I've mentioned on the podcast before that when I grow up, I want to grow seeds, and I want those to be organically grown. So why not learn from those who are already doing it now and learning from them? So take some time to do some research when it comes to pest control strategies. You don't necessarily need to be like running out with, various, sprays and stuff and hitting up your garden left, right, and center. Sometimes a targeted approach is going to be the better approach, and sometimes the slow and steady hand picking is going to be better too. So I would love to know from you, how do you deal with pests in your garden? Let me know over in the Facebook group, and until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you all next week.